Funerals in Islam follow fairly specific rites, though they are subject to regional interpretation and variation in custom. In all cases, however, sharia calls for burial of the body, preceded by a simple ritual involving bathing and shrouding the body, followed by salah. Cremation of the body is forbidden. Common Islamic burial rituals. Burial rituals should normally take place as soon as possible and include collective bathing of the dead body, except in extraordinary circumstances as in Battle of Uhud. Enshrouding dead body in a white cotton or linen cloth. Funeral prayer. Burial of the dead body in a grave. Positioning the deceased so that the head is faced towards Mecca. Bathing the deceased. The corpse is washed. The purpose is to physically cleanse the corpse. The exact manner, the method, style and accessories used for bathing the corpse may vary by locale and temporal position. Bathing the dead body is an essential ritual of the Sunnah of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, and therefore a part of the Islamic sharia. This should occur as soon as possible after death, preferably within hours. Orthodox practice is to wash the body an odd number of times with a cloth hiding its aura. The washers are commonly adult members of the immediate family and of the same gender as the deceased. In the case of violent death, or accident where the deceased has suffered trauma or mutilation, morgue facilities mend the body and wrap it in a shroud to minimize fluid leakage prior to surrendering it to mourners for washing. In shrouding the deceased, the corpse is typically wrapped in a simple plain cloth. This is done to respect the dignity and privacy of the deceased. The specifics of this ritual, including the material, style, and color of the cloth, may vary across regions. However, the shroud should be simple and modest. It is for this reason that Muslims have generally preferred to use white cotton cloth to serve as the shroud. Men may use only 3 pieces of cloth and women 5 pieces of cloth. Some perfume may be applied to the cloth as well. The deceased may be kept in this state for several hours, allowing well-wishers to pass on their respects and condolences. Funeral prayer. The Muslims of the community gather to offer their collective prayers for the forgiveness of the dead. This prayer has been generally termed as the Salat al-Janazah. The Janazah prayer is as follows: like Eid prayer, the Janazah prayer incorporates an additional takbars, the Arabic name for the phrase Allahu Akbar, but there is no ruku and sujood. Supplication for the deceased and mankind is recited. In extraordinary circumstances, the prayer can be postponed and prayed at a later time as was done in the Battle of Uhud. Dogma states it is obligatory for every Muslim adult male to perform the funeral prayer upon the death of any Muslim, but the dogma embraces the practical in that it qualifies, when janazah is performed by the few it alleviates that obligation for all. Burial. The deceased is then taken for burial. The exact manner, customs and style of the grave, the burial and so forth may vary by regional custom. The grave should be aligned perpendicular to the Qibla. The body is placed in the grave without a casket, lying on its right side, and facing the Qibla. Grave markers should be raised only up to a maximum of 30 centimeters above the ground. Thus grave markers are simple, because outwardly lavish displays are discouraged in Islam. Many times graves may even be unmarked, or marked only with a simple wreath. However, it is becoming more common for family members to erect grave monuments. In Middle Eastern cultures, women are generally discouraged from participating in the funeral procession. The reason for this is that in pre-Islamic Arabia it was customary in Arabia for grieving women to wail loudly. Wealthy families often even hired wailers to attend the funerals of their deceased relative. Wailing at funerals is not permitted according to the Sahih Bukhari. 3 fist-sized spheres of hand-packed soil are used as props, one under the head, one under the chin and one under the shoulder. The lowering of the corpse, and positioning of the soil balls is done by the next of kin. In the case of a departed husband, the male brother or brother-in-law usually performs this task. In the case of a departed wife, the husband undertakes this. If the husband is elderly, then the eldest male son is responsible for lowering, alignment and propping the departed. The orthodoxy expects those present to symbolically pour 3 handfuls of soil into the grave while reciting a Quranic verse in Arabic meaning "We created you from it, and return you into it, and from it we will raise you a second time." More prayers are then said, asking for forgiveness of the deceased, and reminding the dead of their profession of faith. The corpse is then fully buried by the grave diggers, who may stamp or pat down the grave to shape. Commonly the eldest male will supervise. After the burial, the Muslims who have gathered to pay their respects to the dead, collectively pray for the forgiveness of the dead. This collective prayer is the last formal collective prayer for the dead. In some cultures, for example Southeast Asian Muslims, the surviving members of the deceased scatter flowers and perfumed rose water upon the grave as the last action prior to leaving the grave. Mourning. According to orthodoxy, loved ones and relatives are to observe a 3-day mourning period. Islamic mourning is observed by increased devotion, receiving visitors and condolences, and avoiding decorative clothing and jewelry in accordance with the Quran. During that time, the widow is not to remarry, interact with na-mahram. However, in case of emergencies such as visiting a doctor because of a health emergency, the widow can interact with na-mahram. Widows observe an extended mourning period, 4 months and 10 days long. Grief for the death of a beloved person is normal, and weeping for the dead is perfectly acceptable in Islam. Islam does expect expression of one's grief to remain dignified. Islam prohibits the expression of grief by loud wailing, shrieking, beating the chest and cheeks, tearing hair or clothes, breaking objects, scratching faces or speaking phrases that make a Muslim lose faith, although much latitude is granted in practice, as fatigue and emotion can adversely affect one's behavior, and such behavior is rarely censured. Directives for widows. The Quran prohibits widows to engage themselves for 4 lunar months and 10 days, after the death of their husbands. According to the Quran, and those of you who die and leave widows behind, they should keep themselves in waiting for 4 months and 10 days. Then when they have fulfilled their term, there is no blame on you about what they do with themselves in accordance with the norms of society. And Allah is well acquainted with what you do. And there is also no blame on you if you tacitly send a marriage proposal to these women or hold it in your hearts. Allah knows that you would definitely talk to them. Do so, but do not make a secret contract. Of course you can say something in accordance with the norms of the society. And do not decide to marry until the law reaches its term. And know that Allah has knowledge of what is in your hearts. So be fearful of Him and know that Allah is most forgiving and most forbearing. Islamic scholars consider this directive a balance between the mourning of a husband's death and the protection of a widow from cultural or societal censure if she became interested in remarrying after her husband unregistered trademark's death, often an economic necessity. This provision also operates to protect the property rights of the unborn, as the duration is enough to ascertain whether a widow is pregnant or not. Husbands are recommended to make a will in favor of their wives for the provision of 1 year unregistered trademark's residence and maintenance, except if the wives themselves leave the house or take any other similar step. As stated in Quran. And those of you who die and leave widows should bequeath for their widows a year unregistered trademark's provision and bequeath that, in this period they shall not be turned out of their residences. But if they themselves leave the residence, there is no blame on you for what they do with themselves according to the norms of society. And Allah is exalted in power, wise. See also, Burial at Sea, Cemetery, Notes. References, Gemdi, Javed. Mizan. Dar al-Ishraq. OCLCA 52,901,690. Amin Arzan Islahi, Tadabbur Quran, 2nd ed., Volume 1, External links, Islamic funeral rites, preparation of the deceased and Janazah prayers, muslimliving.org, cases where exhumation are allowed, according to REFIQH, exhuming the body of my dead sister Islam.